Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insight. In our program, I always talk about the idea, the concept of a so-called USA skepticism. You may not realize that this is only one side of a coin. And the other side of the coin is what we call pro-China stance or pro-China narrative. And I want to spend some time today to talk about this pro-China stance or pro-China narrative. But before getting into a more detailed discussion, I want to caution you with one distinction. Those people in Taiwan who take a pro-China stance may not pro-communist or pro-communist party. A more detailed discussion will be provided later on. So here comes the first question. Who are these people who are living in Taiwan and still take this pro-China stance? Well, put it very simply, that's what we call the so-called blue camp people, or the KMT people, the Kuomintang Party, or the Nationalist Party people, and those voters who vote for them frequently. And these people are basically what we call the mainlanders, or mainlander descendants, be them a second generation or even third generation. Like myself, I'm a so-called second generation mainlander. And of course, there are still some small people of so-called Hakkas and even local Taiwanese who take this pro-China stance. And upon hearing this, you may wonder, well, in history, we all know that the KMT party or the Nationalist Party has been opposing Communist Party for decades, or using their jargon, has been struggling against the CCP or the Chinese Communist Party for decades. How come they become pro-China or even pro-CCP today? Isn't that weird? Yes, it is weird. Well, they have gone through, the two parties, the KMT party and the CCP party, have gone through a series of civil wars. The first wave came in the 1930s, from 1930 to 34, 35. And the second wave came after the war against Japanese invasion, meaning from 46 to 49. And unfortunately, the nationalist government led by the Nationalist Party, namely the KMT Party, was defeated by the CCP and lost mainland entirely to the Communist Party. And then the KMT fled to Taiwan and lived in Taiwan ever after. And for decades, well, at least 6 or 7 decades, the Communist Party had been threatening Taiwan with war, and they say we're gonna wash you with blood, and we're gonna kill you, and we're gonna do this and that to you. And they're still holding some military exercise against us, and so they've been threatening us all the time. So how come that the KMT Party no longer opposes the Communist Party and even take a pro-China stance? Why is that? You may wonder about it. As I see it, there are several reasons for this. The first one is elections. Well, the KMT has been faring fairly good in so-called local elections, but in presidential races, they've been losing most of the time. For instance, they lost the presidential campaign in the year 2000 and 2004. They won it back in 2008 and 2012. Then they lost again in 2016, 2020, and 2024. And nowadays, they are not sure about what happened in 2028. That's the next presidential race. So altogether, we can say that out of the 7 presidential races in the past 20-some years, KMT has won only 2 campaigns, or 2 races in a total of 7. And the DPP won the rest 5 races. And the second alarming factor in terms of Taiwan's election is that KMT has noticed that their voting rates, or the turnout of the total votes has been decreasing steadily, while on the DPP side, it's been rising steadily. And even more alarming to the KMT is that the votes they get from the younger generation, namely people under 30 years of age, they've been getting less and less votes from this group, and the DPP has winning more and more in the younger generation. So that gives KMT a very strong sense of insecurity. So they want to get some help. And the thing they come up with is they want to get some outside help. And unfortunately, they went to, or they go to the CCP on mainland China. They think that's a bigger guy, and perhaps I can fare even better next time with the help of a bigger guy than from outside. Personally, I think it's a wrong tactic, but anyway, that's how they see the thing. So that's the first reason accounting for this change. The second factor contributing to KMT's change for pro-China stance is what I call nostalgia for homeland, or using a more literary expression, perhaps we can call it an attachment to a native soil. That sounds very poetic to a certain extent. Like I said, those people who are taking a more pro-China stance are basically mainlanders. So namely, their parents or their grandparents came from mainland, different provinces and different parts of China after 1949. That's what we call mainlanders. And it's natural for these mainlanders or the mainlander dissidents to have this kind of nostalgia for homeland, for mainland China, of course. And sometimes I call it glorious China complex. I think it's a more accurate term to describe this kind of mentality. Namely, people like us, first or second or even third generation mainlanders in Taiwan, were more easily to identify us with the 5,000 years of China, be them a Chinese history up to 1949, and Chinese culture, Chinese soil, Chinese homeland. At any rate, this is where our ancestors come from. So we identify with China, a cultural China or a historical China. Just like some Americans, when I studied in the United States, I met American people, pure American people, American citizens. They may be second, third, or even fifth, or even longer generations from Ireland, from Greece, or from Germany, Austria. They identify themselves as Austrian or Greek or even Irish. So that was kind of surprising to me. But they think, well, I'm a American citizen now, but my ancestors come from that part or this part of the world. So I think it's natural. And especially in the past, in Taiwan, in our education system, we identify ourselves as Chinese, cultural Chinese. Even today, the official name of our country is not Taiwan. It's not like what you think. It's the official name of our country is Republic of China. So we consider us China, the China, for many years until very recently. So we've been teaching Chinese history, geography of China, arts of China, religions of China, and the language. Although we use different writing systems now, we use the classical system, and they use the simplified version, but basically we can easily read the other version. So that's only natural. And that's the second reason accounting for this kind of so-called transformation or change, whatever you call it. And the third reason is that Communist China's propaganda against Taiwan begins to take a toll on Taiwan. In the past, we call it propaganda or we call it United Front efforts, but nowadays we call it brainwashing or we call it cognitive war or cognitive warfare. As I mentioned before, the main themes for this kind of cognitive war against Taiwan is that, well, China is rising and China is becoming the second largest country in the world or second strongest country in the world. We got a number 2 economy in the world, next only to that of the United States. And now we're strong enough to challenge the United States, to challenge the hegemonic status of United States. And we have very powerful military, we have very advanced weapon systems, and we have very advanced technology. We have aircraft carriers, we have a space program, we have this and that. So in short, China is now strong enough to avenge what they call century of humiliation ever since the Opium War in the 1840s. So this is another way to echo what I call the glorious China complex. And in light of the confrontation, or in light of the Sino-US confrontation, it's only natural for these people to identify with this kind of USA skepticism and pro-China stance. And this is what I consider the third reason for it. The fourth reason, the last reason, is some people, some Taiwanese guys, are actually bought off by the Communist Party or by Chinese communists, or they sold themselves out to Communist China. For the past 30 years, China has been doing very well in terms of economic development. They are quite generous on spending money when it comes to buying loyalty. And that's what they do to some Taiwanese people, provided if this kind of a financial inducement is accompanied by some kind of a honey traps, it works even better. And that's how some people fall for it. And that's the last reason for it. Therefore, as I see it, these are the four main reasons for some people in Taiwan who take a pro-China stance. But having said all these, I have to make a careful distinction, as I mentioned earlier. Those people who take a pro-China stance may not be pro-Chinese Communist Party or pro-communism themselves. They may hate communism, they may hate Communist Party, but because of these reasons, they take a pro-China stance. They do not realize the contradiction contained in this kind of mentality, but that's how they behave. So I always tell them, I always criticize them of being hypocritical or being at least double standard. And they hate me for saying that, but anyway, that's how I see it. So in conclusion, I would say the root of the problem for these people is that they confuse the Chinese communist regime with China itself. And that's a very complicated question or a subject. Actually, I can write a doctoral dissertation on this subject, but because of the time limit, I think I have to stop today. And today, my main task is try to explain why there are some people in Taiwan who take a pro-China stance, but they may not be pro-communist or may not be pro-communism. And that's a point I'm trying to make, and that's a distinction I'm trying to make. Well, that's all I want to share with you today. I hope you liked this program, and please share it with your friends, and please subscribe to it if you haven't done so. And most importantly, do remember to click the icon bell. I'll see you next time.